Hi, my name is John Gibbs. I'm 53 years old now, and I live in Athens, Georgia, which is a whopping 250 meters above sea level. I thought that it might be useful for people to have a how-to video on how to climb the Matterhorn, especially for Americans and people coming from a long distance where it's difficult to go to Switzerland and sort of check out the area first, like it was difficult for me. I basically climbed the mountain sight unseen. So I thought that doing a how-to video would be of more use than simply showing pictures from the trip. I hope you find that useful as well. Definitely let me know if you agree or disagree. I can always change things for the future. Okay, so first and foremost, why climb the Matterhorn? I think if you're interested in climbing the Matterhorn, you probably already have your reasons, but I guess I might as well give mine. Beyond the fact that it's probably the most iconic mountain in the world, I mean, I think even visually it's more iconic than Mount Everest, even though Mount Everest is probably more popular. Um, it certainly has that amazing look and kind of a terrifying look as well, that sort of shark tooth sticking up into the blue sky. In addition to that, my father sort of turned me on to mountain climbing when I was a very young child. I'm 6, 7 years old. And it was always one of his thoughts to go and climb the Matterhorn. He never, unfortunately, was able to do that, but I figured that I would climb it in his stead. And so I had, sort of family reasons to do it as well as just wanting to climb a super iconic mountain. Why do a how-to video instead of just sort of showing off some pictures and video? Well, that was more along the lines of something that I wish that I had been able to get a hold of when I was looking to climb the mountain and to prepare for it. I didn't see very many how-to videos. In fact, I didn't find any how-to videos. So they may be out there, but I was unable to find them. So I thought that this could actually fill a useful niche for people who are interested or people who are just thinking about it, and at least you would, know the realities of it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. As far as who this is for, it's really for anybody. Obviously, you can watch it if you want to, but it's most particularly for people who are interested in climbing the mountain themselves. I think you might find some of what I have to say useful. I'm sure some of it won't be, but hopefully, on the balance, it's useful. Okay, first of all, my experience so that you can sort of gauge where you are versus where I am. I am most assuredly an amateur climber. I am not a professional climber by any means. I have previously climbed the Grand Teton 3 times, I believe, once with a guide and twice with a friend. I've also climbed Mount Tiwanaut a couple of times, once with a guide and once by myself, and climbed Mount Owen before with a guide. I've also climbed Mount Rainier in Washington State and done a whole bunch of smaller, less technical peaks. As far as like rock climbing itself, I would say, top rope wise, I can certainly do 5'10. I can try 5'11. Down to like trad climbing where I have to place gear myself, I'd probably say 5'7", 5'8" is what I'm comfortable with. It depends so much on the route and the protection at that point. I'm kind of a chicken when it comes to climbing vertical overhanging stuff with trad, so I usually don't push my ability levels that hard. But certainly that puts me in whatever position that is. You may be better or worse at any of those different things. As far as conditioning is concerned, I am 53 years old, so I'm definitely well past my prime of life. But I do a lot of strength training and I also do a lot of aerobic work. In particular, I like to go cycling, and Athens is a very I guess challenging cycling environment. It's incredibly rolly. It's in the foothills of the Shenandoah Mountains, Appalachian Mountains, and it is very, very rolly. There's hardly any flat ground around here, so there's a lot of up and down. That's not particularly useful for mountain climbing. It would be better, honestly, if I lived someplace nearer to mountains, obviously, because I'd have more altitude for one thing, but for another, I could get more sort of straight up climbs and straight down climb, and on the bike, and that would actually be useful. But as far as training is concerned, there are mountains about an hour and a half to the north, so I'm able to go up there and work there as well. What did I do in particular for training for the Matterhorn beyond just sort of general conditioning? The biggest thing I did was I stuffed my backpack with starting with 30 pounds of weight and went up to 65 pounds and walked my dogs 2 miles a day. Again, it's very hilly around here, so there's a lot of up and down. I also went up north a couple of times and climbed up there's a pretty good size hill around the Unicoi Gap in North Georgia on the Appalachian Trail. So a few of those with the dogs. I have huskies, so they don't mind. They'll go as long as I want to go. But those kinds of things were very important for extra training. In addition, I think mentally it's important to train too. It's something where I would watch a lot of videos and I really thought about the climb a lot. It turned out that that was actually pretty useful in this case. You don't want to underestimate the Matterhorn. It is a very serious mountain. It is by far the most difficult mountain that I have personally climbed. On to preparation. The first thing I think that's really important to understand is how expensive it's going to be to climb the Matterhorn. Again, if you're like an American like me, where you're used to going and paying like I think it's $20 or $30 to get into, like say Grand Teton National Park or whatever national park. Sometimes you can go in the backwoods and just in the Sierras you can just go climb for free basically. There are a lot of expenses that you don't have to incur, but that you're likely to incur. One of them, of course, is just getting to Switzerland, but I'll ignore that for now. So, assuming you're already there, Zermatt is an incredibly expensive town. You could certainly climb from the Italian side and save a great deal of money on that front. It's not as classic of a route, but you could also do a traverse potentially and go up the Italian side and come down the Swiss side and then, take a car or train or something like that back to Italy again. So you could save some money that way. We also saved some money in terms of where we stayed. We stayed at an Airbnb, which was substantially cheaper than a lot of the hotels in the area. But the trade-off for that was an 85-meter hike up a hill every afternoon to get back to the place. So it was significant. It was a significant climb to get back up to the place that we stayed. In addition, eating is extremely expensive in Zermatt. Getting a meal it's about as expensive as any place that I've ever been just for getting standard meals. So be prepared for that. In addition, there is also gondola fees and train fees and any other kind of fees, whether you're climbing anywhere in the area to sort of get back up into the mountains. If you don't want to do a several-hour uphill hike, you're going to want to take gondolas, and the gondolas are quite expensive. We did not do this, but unfortunately we didn't know about it until afterwards. But there's a thing called a Swiss pass, which I think I would highly recommend. You pay a certain amount of money, I think it's $100 or $120, but then all of the gondolas are half price, and the trains are half price, and lots of things are half price. So that would ultimately save a great deal of money on the trip, so I would highly recommend that. In addition, the huts are quite expensive. The Hernley hut is, I believe, right around $150. I'm just quoting it in dollars. The Swiss franc is so close to the dollar that they're basically the same amount. And food and things are included there, but there is no water is not included, and so it's $9, 9 francs for a liter and a half of water, which is pretty outrageous. I guess they know where they're going to make their money because you need water up there. There is flowing water out of the taps and everything, so if you took a Sterapen or a Sawyer filter or something like that, which I did not do, but I would highly recommend taking that with you, and you could sterilize the water yourself, and I'm sure it would be perfectly fine to drink. In addition, everyone in Zermatt drinks bottled water, but that's ridiculous because they actually have some of the best quality water that I've ever tasted. It comes straight off the mountains. It's spring water. It's delicious. Don't spend money on bottled water in Zermatt. That would be stupid because the water's delicious. So there you go. Next up is the perennial question, to guide or not to guide. I originally had thought about doing this with a friend of mine who is quite a good climber and much more experienced than I am. He couldn't make it, and so I was semi-forced to go with a guide, but honestly, on looking at the climb itself, I thought it was probably a good idea. And so Jeff Witt, who, there's a picture of him, super nice guy from the United States. He now lives in Chamonix, so it's fairly easy for him to get to Switzerland and the Matterhorn. He was an excellent guide, and in retrospect, I absolutely would not have made the climb without him. It just would have been impossible. It was basically pushing it to the limits, even with him there. So I highly recommend getting a guide. It is going to be expensive. You're going to have to pay for it. The entire thing, guiding, this is not including room and board and so forth, but including the huts and the guiding and so forth, was about $3,500. So and it could be more expensive than that potentially also. So these are the kinds of things you need to know about beforehand. In addition, if you don't have equipment, you're going to have to pay for whatever equipment you need to purchase before then too. So it is a very expensive trip, not including airfare, not including where you stay in town in Zermatt, not including the food that you eat in Zermatt. So you just sort of need to be prepared for that and to save up if that's what you want to do. Equipment. So I'm not going to go through an absolutely complete list of this. If you would be interested in that, I certainly can put it in the comments below, so you're welcome to request that if you'd like. I think the most important thing, of course, is shoes. I went with the La Sportiva Trango waterproof version. I think they're called ice cubes. They're the crazy colored ones. They worked really, really well for me. A lot of people wore like La Sportiva Nepals, which are heavier boots, or the Scarpa version of that. I can't remember the name of those right now. I honestly, given the fact that I climbed it in late July and the weather was actually pretty decent and pretty warm, the Nepals were definitely overkill for that. And as they're heavier and they have less feel, it's not there. It wouldn't be useful under those circumstances. Now, if the weather had been colder or if it had been icier on the route, then I think the Nepals would have been a good choice. So, unfortunately, you kind of have to make a commitment about one or the other unless you have both. In which case, I guess you can take them both and just see what works best at the time. As for other things, clothing, it's basic mountaineering stuff. You just want a ton of layers. Synthetic, probably wool, otherwise. No cotton, nothing like that. Definitely a good pair of sunglasses, definitely with some sort of keeper on the back so that they don't fall off, because you could seriously get snowblind up there. It's very high altitude and there's a lot of snow. Even with all the global warming, there's still quite a bit of snow up on the top part. In addition, a good pair of climbing gloves, something that's very thin and has leather palms, but it has good insulation quality. And a couple of pairs of socks. I wore wool underwear, but certainly synthetic underwear would work as well. So things like that. Also, ice axes. I have a standard length ice axe, and that's what I brought. And my guide Jeff had asked me to bring a short ice axe, which I didn't really understand until I got there. And indeed, a short ice axe would be a good thing. So you probably want one that's about half the length of your standard ice axe. It's just the slopes where the snow is so steep that it's a pain in the rear to have to lift up the ice axe as far as you have to drive it down. So I would definitely recommend getting a short ice axe. I wish I had done that, although certainly it did not affect the climb entirely. It just made it more of a pain to get up there. A couple of other equipment sundries. First of all, I had a 33-liter Osprey pack, and that was perfectly adequate. You don't need to have a sleeping bag. The Swiss huts, even though they're very expensive, are basically 3-star hotels, so they have very nice beds. You just need a sleeping bag liner or something, because they don't tend to wash their stuff, I think, except once a season. And in terms of crampons, really just make sure that they fit your boots. That's the important part, because you definitely will need crampons on the upper slopes. Training. I think the things that perhaps I could have done better. Number one would be dealing with low altitude. And I think what I am going to do for the future would be, or is going to be, to purchase a high altitude training mask and attempt to train with that to kind of mimic high altitude training, because that is the number one most difficult thing to deal with coming from basically sea level, trying to deal with how my body's going to react at high altitude. In addition, I would recommend doing more step-ups, especially weighted step-ups. So, take those little the boxes that are at the gym, or heck, at home, doesn't really matter, and just step up and down those things over and over and over again, because that would be the one motion that my legs just were not particularly good at. It happens every single time I climb a mountain, and I always think to myself, gee, I really need to do step-ups, so next time I'm going to do it. One other very oddball thing, which I think is pretty specific to the Matterhorn, is that I wish I had done some rope climbing to prepare for the climb. There are a lot of fixed ropes. I think maybe 15, 16, 17 sets of fixed ropes going along, and there's a big section of it at the top that's just right in a row, around a dozen of them right in a row, and it was very tiring on my hands. Fortunately, it wasn't that tiring, but it definitely was, especially having to wait, because it tended to get clogged up on the ropes, so oftentimes you'd have to climb halfway up and then kind of hang there for a while. So my hands were definitely cramped by the end, and I would highly recommend doing some rope climbing just to get your upper body and your hands in shape for doing that. Okay, now we're in Switzerland, so a few things to think about there. Number one is on-site prep. You don't just show up and climb the mountain unless you're in fantastically good shape, in which case I don't know that you necessarily need to be watching this thing. How many days should you be there? I would say as many as you can afford, both time and monetarily. I ended up climbing the Matterhorn on the second and third day I was there because of weather issues, and that definitely hurt my performance because I did not have as much time to acclimatize. So what did I do to acclimatize? Well, the biggest thing that Jeff and I did was we climbed the egg climbing route on the south face of the Riffelhorn. That was a lovely, I think it was about a 6 pitch climb, nothing too terribly complicated, but it had some really nice exposure. Actually, quite a beautiful climb. And it was good for me, especially because I was climbing in my boots as opposed to rock shoes. So it was a good opportunity to, get a little bit of a head for the altitude and a little bit of a head for heights and a little bit of a head for with what my shoes would do versus regular rock shoes that I'm used to climbing in. So all of that was very useful. The plan originally was to climb the Brighthorn the next day, or Castor and Pollux potentially, and do some snow work, but unfortunately the weather did not cooperate. Speaking of weather, the best thing to do is to have some time so that you can be flexible about how you want to climb the mountain. It turned out to be a really good thing that we were there for a week, including travel days, because even though I ended up climbing the mountain early, it was something where I could have climbed it a couple of days later. And as I climbed the mountain early with Jeff, we were able to do the Via Ferrata on another day, which is an awful lot of fun, and also go paragliding another time. So, as it was my honeymoon, my wife was very appreciative of being able to do some things with me. So now we're finally to the climb, which is generally a 2-day affair. The first day is relatively easy. It's just a hike up to the Hornley Hut, plus a gondola ride to get to the hike up to the Hornley Hut. You can certainly walk out of Zermatt, I guess, if you want a more ambitious and vigorous first day, but it's a pretty good vertical ascent to get up there. And even taking the gondola, it's about a 2-hour walk up to the hut from where the gondola is. So it's a pretty substantial undertaking if you want to climb out of Zermatt to it. So again, that's where the Swiss Pass comes in very useful. If you have a Swiss Pass, then you can get the gondola for half price. As it turned out, Jeff had taken care of all these things for me, so it was all just sort of in the fees. So that worked out nicely too, because it was just sort of one lump sum and I didn't have to worry about each individual thing as I went. One thing that we did that I think was actually excellent was that we did a partial climb on the first day. So we got to the Hornley Hut around 1 or 2 in the afternoon and then climbed up the first maybe hour or so of the climb as a way of acclimatizing, since I'd only been there for one climbing day previous to it, but also just as a way of kind of looking around and getting a sense of the route, because of course when you get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and start climbing before 4, it's very dark and it can be challenging to route find, and it was extremely useful to sort of have a mental picture of what the route looked like from the day before. Some other recommendations for day one: the first thing I would say would be to relax. I know that can be rather difficult because you're looking forward to a climb, and that's very exciting and scary. And also, given where the hut is, you kind of look straight up onto the mountain, onto the flanks of the mountain, and the ridge route you're going to take, and that's a bit overawing, I suppose. It's a rather impressive sight from the hut. The second thing I would recommend would be to drink a lot, certainly, because altitude is going to get rid of a lot of the liquid you have in your body, and you're going to get dehydrated the second day. Third thing would be to have everything ready, like seriously ready the night before when you go to sleep, so that you're able to get up and not think about it. Just put your harness on, eat some breakfast, and be ready to go out the door. I would also recommend bringing some melatonin with you. A couple of those might help you sleep a little bit better. Between drinking so much and the altitude and the nervousness, I maybe got 3 hours of sleep the night before. And now to day 2, which is the big day. It was about 11 hours that we took, I think 11 hours and 15 minutes to climb up and down, so it will be a marathon for sure. Definitely the first thing you want to do is get up on time. We got up at a little before 3 o'clock in the morning. I don't know how to put this delicately, but you should definitely use the facilities, especially for number 2, if you need to. You're not going to have anywhere. I guess you could go in the Solvay hut up above, but you really don't even have time to go because you're just pushing so hard to get up to the top. So if you can use the facilities, then you should definitely do so. You should also eat quickly and be ready to go out the door when the rush happens. The picture that I have here was taken very quickly, but you can see that it's kind of like an amusement park line, basically, waiting to get out the door. So you want to be ready to go so that you're not at the very end of the whole thing. And there is an order. The Swiss guides get to go first, and then other guides who are not the local guides go, and then the non-guided parties go. But it's all kind of a big mass of people that go out right away. Here I've got a picture of the route that you can see. It goes straight up the ridge for a long ways, and then it kind of tips over to the shoulder, what's called the shoulder, and then the upper snowfields that are just below the summit ridge. It's a impressively long climb. The bottom from the forced perspective view doesn't look like it's that long, but there's an awful lot of traversing sideways horizontally as you go up. So it's not as short as it looks, and it's also quite sloggy at the bottom. So there's a few things that you can think about to get ready. Number one is to understand that you're going to do a short, brief hike, but the climb itself really starts with a couple of fixed ropes, and so you need to be ready to go. At 4 o'clock in the morning, 3:45 in the morning, to hit the ropes and start climbing immediately. It goes instantly. There's no kind of warm up to the climb. The next thing that I would recommend would be to try to keep up with the local guides, with people who really, really know the route. Um, don't blow yourself out, however. You need to maintain a pace that you can keep up. So that's something that you have to internally figure out for yourself. I know for a fact that I watched Jeff have to slow down like about 3 notches in order to slow down to my pace. And he would have been able to keep up with the guides, no problem, but he's also a guide. And between being older and not being able to train at altitude and only having one day to acclimatize, basically, I was rather slower than I would have wished. But anyway, it's especially if you go without a guide, it's very useful to try to keep up with other people who know the route, because that's critical to climbing this mountain efficiently, which is pretty important. It's definitely a slog getting through the bottom part of the climb, because it is more horizontal. So there's not a lot of places where you kind of get to do more technical climbing. You're just kind of wandering through big old rock fields. For sure, enjoy the brightening view as it comes, because as the sun starts to come up and it gets lighter, it's absolutely gorgeous, and you're already way, way, way above the valley once you get up there, and you're climbing on kind of the eastern face, and so the sun's coming up behind you, and it's really just smashing views. So that's definitely worth keeping track of. Don't get so focused on the climb that you're not looking around and enjoying yourself, because, I mean, that's why you're there, right? Safety on the lower slopes. There's not a huge amount of fixed gear placed for the lower slopes. There are 2 places where there's fixed ropes at the very, very beginning of the climb, and then a little ways up, there's a few fixed ropes that kind of take care of the more difficult parts. For the most part, safety at that point is just keeping track of where you are and really concentrating, because even though the climbing is not technically difficult, it's on extremely steep slopes with scree, and so if you started to fall, you're not going to stop. So you really want to keep track of where you are and really concentrate. So that's more or less the safety of the lower slopes. The Moseley slabs is where things really start to get a little bit more technical and fun. It's the With the fixed ropes, it's the crux of the entire climb. Technically, I guess it was not a particularly difficult section, but it was a lot of fun, because you're climbing with a lot of exposure. Finally vertically, as opposed to a lot of horizontal walking and so forth. And the other thing is that you have a goal, because once you get through the lower Moseley slabs, you are up to the Solvay hut at 4,000 meters, which is kind of the halfway point of the climb, even though it's more vertical distance. The rest of it's a little more technical, so it takes longer to get up the last 500 meters or so. The Solvay hut, which is just about 4,000 meters, is the really the only place where you get to take a significant break. And by significant, I mean like 5 minutes. So it's not exactly a huge break, but at least you get to sit down, and it's hanging over a vertical area, so the views are fantastic. But there's a bench, there's flat ground. You can sit for a minute, take a drink, get ready, so forth. So get ready for the upper slopes. The upper slopes are where it really starts to get fun. The lower part of the climb I felt was kind of sloggy, but the whole thing, starting with the Moseley slabs, was just fantastic. This was the reason why I was there, was climbing the upper slopes. There's some more slabs up above the Solvay hut. I believe those are the upper Moseley slabs. And then you get to where, at least for us, we needed to put crampons on, because we started to get into snow fields. There's a huge section of fixed ropes on the upper slopes. I at a guess there were maybe a dozen of these things in a row, and it was extremely tiring. It was shocking how cramped up my hands got, and I guess I just hadn't really thought that for a mountain climb I was going to have to be worried about rope climbing abilities. As far as safety on the upper slopes is concerned, there are a number of iron pins that stick out, sometimes with curlicues, sometimes just iron. And there's stanchions in the slopes, in the snow slopes up above. So there are a lot of places to throw a rope around. There are not very many places where you have to pitch anything out. I think Jeff pitched out maybe 2 to 3 pitches on the upper ice fields, snow fields at the top. But aside from that, we could pretty much simulclimb, and he could keep me well secured through these little pins and stanchions that came out from the rock. As far as safety is concerned on the upper snowfields, there are stanchions, but at some points, like I said, Jeff actually pitched out a few of the pitches on that climb because it is certainly the most dangerous portion of the climb, and so it's something where you have to pay attention. And now, as we finally approach the summit at 4478 meters, you really start to enjoy the view and so forth. First of all, going up it is the statue of Saint Bernard, which by tradition you're supposed to rub his head if you come up from the Swiss side. Uh, Good luck. Who knows? I'll take whatever it is. But rubbing the head of Saint Bernard is not a bad thing to do as you get there. The summit ridge is quite spectacular and actually rather terrifying because you're looking at a 60 to 70 degree slope going down one side and actually an in-cut slope on the other side. So, and the ridge itself is half a meter wide, maybe ish. Actually, as we approached the summit, I knew that we were going to be serious about the whole thing because Jeff turned around and said, "If you start to fall, you yell which direction so I can jump the other way." It's literally that small of a ridge, and there's nothing to be done. There's no way to, safety wise, there's no way to bolt yourself into anything. You're just up there. So it did not feel nearly as scary as it looked in the videos, but it was definitely something where you kind of want to concentrate. You don't want to just be enjoying the views too much. On the other hand, definitely enjoy the views because, of course, that's one of the reasons why you're there. And definitely enjoy the moment. There's not a lot of time to be up there because, again, there's nowhere to sit. There's really nowhere to kind of even rest at the top. So it's more of a get up there, look around, take some pictures, kind of take a deep breath and think to yourself, wow, I actually got to the top of this thing and now I got to get back down again. So for sure, take a moment, enjoy it, but also realize that you're not going to be sitting up there for an hour or two enjoying the views and relaxing and eating lunch and so forth.
I think we beat the Scotsman too.
Yeah, we did.
So there's a plus.
At least we beat the amateurs.
Exactly. Hey man, I was just happy to get to the top. Oh, that is a mean looking peak.
And the descent. The big thing to understand about the descent is don't underestimate it. It's by far the hardest descent I've had to do. It actually took us 15 minutes longer than the ascent to get down the mountain. In most mountains, there are kind of escape routes off of it where you can rappel or abseil down. On the Matterhorn, that's really not an option. And of course, the top is very, very steep and very, very dangerous, and going down is much more dangerous than going up it. So it's something where you can't just speed down off the top. You have to really take your time and you're going faster than on the way up, but you can't just like run down the mountain. Route finding on the way down is perhaps trickier than on the way up. The big reason is probably that people have kind of spread out at that point. So whereas there's kind of a group of folks going up, at least if the weather is good and it's prime season, so that you can sort of follow them on the way up. On the way down, people have spread out, and so they're all over the place, and so the route can be particularly tricky to find on the way down. In addition, I would highly recommend bringing 3 liters of water as opposed to 2. Jeff and I each brought 2 liters of water, and we were extremely dehydrated by the end of it. You definitely don't want to bring gallons and gallons of water with you because you'll be weighed down, but I would say 3 liters would be a good idea. If not, probably what I should have done when I was at the summit was to get some snow and put it in my Nalgene bottles and let it melt, so at least we had a little bit more water when we got down to the lower altitudes. Another thing to think about is don't rest. Time is pretty critical, even on a beautiful day. You never know, the weather could get bad any second. But in addition, the gondola that takes you back to Zermatt stops running at 5 o'clock, and it's a 70 to 90 minute walk from the Hernley hut to the gondola. So you want to make sure that you have enough time to get down to the gondola itself before it stops running, or else you get a nice long walk down into Zermatt. We got back about 3:15, I believe, and so we got back to the gondola with about 15 minutes to spare. And we were pushing the whole day, so it was one of those. Now, again, if you're in better shape and you're basically running up and down the mountain like many people can do, then you're not going to have to worry about that so much. But for someone like me and my sort of conditioning and being an amateur climber and doing it for the first time, it was definitely something that was on our minds towards the end, was to make sure that we made the gondola so we didn't have to walk back to town. So, what are my takeaways from climbing the Matterhorn? The first thing is you cannot have too much prep. I'm definitely buying an altitude training mask, and I'm going to do weighted step ups before I attempt the next one of these things. So that would be some big ones to do. But again, aerobic conditioning, aerobic conditioning, aerobic conditioning. You don't have to be that fantastic of a climber. It's not particularly technically challenging, but it is very aerobically challenging. So that's the big thing to focus on. If you can spare the time and the money, be in Zermatt longer. Acclimatizing is crucial, and there's a ton of other things to climb and to do while you're there, so it's not like you're going to be bored ever. So for sure, you should spend as much time as you can afford to spend there. Would I climb the Matterhorn again? Absolutely, I would climb the Matterhorn again. It would be a really fun thing to do, especially a second time, because I would probably know it better and feel more comfortable doing it and probably even enjoy it more. I think I would rather climb the Eiger, the Jungfrau, and some other iconic Swiss mountains first, however, if and when I get back to Switzerland, just to sort of mix it up and to, go see different parts of the country and climb other mountains first. What's next for me? A trekking and non-technical climbing trip to Nepal. I have been looking forward to this for years, and in addition to the views and the fantastic opportunity to just be in Nepal and be in a different culture and be in the Himalayas, I'm also curious to see how my body holds up with above 6,000 meter climbing, since the highest I've ever climbed has been about 4,500 meters. So we will have to see how that goes, and hopefully next summer I will post a video of that. So if you're interested, make sure you subscribe, even though it'll be a while before the next video comes out. That way you'll get a notification and you will be able to join me on the trip. Thank you.